The moment his hand touched mine, the air shifted. 500 people watched the Mafia boss lead me to the dance floor, but only my father knew what that song meant. And when the first note hit, his eyes filled with tears. If you're ready to enjoy this story, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us in creating more amazing stories, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's jump right into the story. The ballroom shimmered with champagne laughter and gold, but every reflection of me was broken. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors. Violins wept through air thick with perfume and ambition. Couples twirled past my corner table like I was furniture, expensive, damaged, best left untouched. I wore emerald silk that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but no amount of couture could hide what everyone came to see. The scar that carved down my face like a map of violence, a souvenir from the night fire, tried to erase the ace legacy. Near the bar, a cluster of trust fund parasites pretended to whisper. Their voices carried perfectly. They wanted me to hear. Tragic, really. Richard Ace built an empire, and his daughter looks like.
Sure.
She might hear you. So? What's she going to do? She hasn't left that corner all night. Laughter. Cruel, careless, casually devastating. I'd survived an explosion that killed my mother. I'd endured 17 surgeries, physical therapy that felt like torture, and 3 years of mirror avoidance. But sitting here, decorated and displayed like a cautionary tale at my father's corporate gala, felt like dying in slow motion. Across the ballroom, my father stood at the head table surrounded by investors and sycophants. Richard Ace, the man who could close billion-dollar deals with a handshake, who'd built Ace Corporation from nothing into an empire that spanned continents. But tonight, his hands trembled around his whiskey glass. His eyes kept finding mine, then darting away like the sight of me physically hurt him. It did hurt him. I knew that. The guilt had been eating him alive for 3 years. The accident wasn't an accident.
It was an attack.
Corporate sabotage that turned lethal. My mother died in the flames. I should have died too. Would have if not for. The ballroom doors opened. Conversations faltered like someone had cut the music, though the orchestra kept playing. Heads turned. The air shifted, grew heavier, charged with something dangerous. Martin Allen walked in. I'd seen his face in newspapers, heard his name whispered in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. The devil in a suit. Head of the Black Serpents. The kind of man whose presence made billionaires check their exits. But I knew him differently. I knew the tattoos that coiled up his hands like smoke. I knew the voice that had cut through fire and chaos 3 years ago, telling me to stay awake, to keep breathing, that help was coming. I'd never seen his face clearly that night. Only shadows and ink and the impossible gentleness in hands that supposedly killed without hesitation. He moved through the crowd like a blade through silk. People parted. No one dared block his path. And he was walking straight toward me. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping marble. His face had gone white. Around the room, security guards tensed, hands drifting toward hidden weapons. Martin stopped in front of my table. Up close, his eyes were darker than I remembered, but they held the same impossible warmth I'd seen through smoke and terror. He extended his hand, tattooed, steady, patient. May I have this dance? The ballroom went silent. The kind of silence that screams. Every camera phone turned toward us.
Every whisper died.
Every eye locked on the scarred CEO's daughter and the Mafia boss who'd just asked her to dance. Behind him, my father's whiskey glass shattered in his hand. I should have said no. Should have run. Should have let security drag him out before this moment could become tomorrow's scandal. But something in his voice, low, certain, achingly familiar, made my hand move before my brain caught up. You survived fire, he said quietly just for me. Don't hide from light. I placed my trembling hand in his. That was the moment everything changed. But to understand why, you need to know what happened 3 years ago. You need to know about the night fire stole my mother, scarred my body, and made a monster save my life. You need to know who Martin Allen really was, and why the man the world feared was the only person who'd ever made me feel safe. Let me take you back. I took his hand. The moment our skin touched, the ballroom seemed to tilt. Or maybe that was just me. 3 years of hiding colliding with the impossible reality of tattooed fingers wrapping gently around mine. Martin Allen didn't smile. Didn't smirk or gloat or acknowledge the 500 people currently watching us like we were a car crash in slow motion. He just held my hand with the same steady certainty I remembered from the night I should have died. Breathe, he said quietly, just like before. Before. The word unlocked something in my chest, a memory I'd spent 3 years trying to bury.
Fire.
Smoke so thick it turned air into poison. The weight of a steel beam pinning my legs while flames crawled closer. My mother's screams cutting off too suddenly, too finally. Then hands. Tattooed hands lifting the beam like it weighed nothing. A voice cutting through panic. Stay with me. Keep your eyes open. I'd tried to see his face, but smoke and shadows swallowed everything except those tattoos, serpents and thorns winding up his forearms like they were alive. My mother, I'd whispered. His grip had tightened on my shoulders. I know. I'm sorry. Then sirens. Then darkness. Then 17 surgeries, and a life that no longer fit. The memory fractured as Martin helped me stand. My legs felt uncertain, like I'd forgotten how to be vertical. Around us, the whispers started, a rising tide of shock and speculation. Is she actually with him? Richard Ace is going to lose his mind. Too late. My father was already losing it. Across the ballroom, he stood frozen at the head table, face cycling through expressions too fast to name. Beside him, Gerald Morrison, our company's CFO and my father's oldest friend, leaned in and hissed something urgent. My father's response carried across the silence. What the hell is he doing here? Martin heard it. I watched his jaw tighten. Watched something flash through his eyes. Not anger, but something older. Something that looked like regret. He'd been here before. Not at this gala, but in my father's orbit. They had history, the kind written in blood and blame, and 3 years of my father hunting the man he thought destroyed our family. Mr. Ace, Martin called out, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through silk. We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss, my father shot back. His hand was bleeding where the champagne glass had cut him, but he didn't seem to notice. Security is not going to touch me, Martin finished calmly. Because if they try, everyone in this room will learn exactly why I'm here. And I don't think you want that conversation broadcast to 500 of your closest investors. The threat hung in the air like smoke. My father's face went white, then red, then dangerously blank, the expression he wore when closing hostile negotiations. Mabel, he said, his voice shaking. Step away from him.
Now.
But I didn't move. Couldn't move. Because Martin was still holding my hand, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like the broken thing everyone pretended not to see. I felt seen. It's okay, Dad, I heard myself say. The words felt strange in my mouth, defiant, certain mine. I want to dance with him. The ballroom erupted into whispers. My father looked like I'd slapped him. Martin's thumb brushed across my knuckles. Gentle, grounding. You don't have to, he murmured. If you want to walk away, I'll leave. No scene. No drama. I looked up at him. Really looked. Past the reputation and the rumors and the newspapers that called him the devil in a suit. Past the tattoos and the scars and the dangerous authority that made billionaires nervous. I looked at the man who'd saved me when he should have let me burn. I know what they say about you, I whispered. Ruthless. Untouchable. A killer. His expression didn't change. They're not wrong. Then why did you save me? Something shifted in his eyes. Something raw and honest and almost painful to witness. Because some orders are worth disobeying. Behind us, the orchestra conductor looked desperately between Martin, my father, and the frozen crowd, waiting for someone to tell him what to do. Martin didn't break eye contact with me. Play something slow, he called over his shoulder. The lady deserves a proper dance. My father started forward, but Gerald caught his arm. Richard, don't. Not here. Not in front of everyone. That's the man who— I know who he is, Gerald hissed. But causing a scene won't help Mabel. And it won't change what happened. What happened? The phrase felt too small for the explosion that rewrote my entire existence. The orchestra began playing, something slow and haunting that made the air feel heavier. Martin led me toward the dance floor, past tables full of people who couldn't decide whether to look away or record everything on their phones. They're all watching, I breathed. Let them watch, Martin said. They've been staring at your scar for 3 years. Let them stare at your courage instead. My eyes burned. I'd cried more tonight than I had in months. He positioned his hand on my back, respectful, careful, like I was something precious instead of something broken. I shouldn't be here, he admitted quietly. Your father's right about that. Then why are you? His eyes found mine, dark, steady, unbearably kind. Because 3 years ago I made you a promise. I told you help was coming. I told you that you'd survive. I did survive. No, he said softly. You've been hiding. There's a difference. The words hit like a punch. Because he was right. I'd survived the fire, but I'd been dying slowly ever since. One whisper, one pitying look, one, she was beautiful once at a time. We began to move. Slowly at first, testing the space between us. His hand was warm against my back. Mine trembled in his. Around us, the ballroom faded. The whispers dulled. Even my father's fury felt distant. This is insane, I whispered. Probably, Martin agreed. You're a criminal. Definitely. My father wants you dead. Has for years. I should be terrified of you. His grip tightened slightly, protective, not possessive. Are you? I thought about that night. About hands pulling me from fire. About a voice promising I'd live. About 3 years of wondering who'd saved me and why. No, I admitted. I'm not. And that was the truth that scared me most. He shouldn't have been there, at my father's gala, in my corner, holding my hand like I deserved to be held. But neither should I have felt safe when he looked at me. Yet somehow, impossibly, I did. The music swelled, but it sounded wrong, like the orchestra was playing through water, uncertain and discordant. The gala tried to continue, tried to pretend that Martin Allen's presence was normal, that the tension crackling through the ballroom wasn't about to ignite into something none of us could control. It didn't work. Conversations restarted in forced bursts. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Martin, my father, and me like we were pieces on a chessboard, and they were trying to predict the next catastrophic move. Champagne glasses were raised but not drunk from. Laughter erupted too loud, then died too quickly. The whispers, though, those never stopped. Did you see the way he looked at her? Richard Ace is going to have him arrested. Why would Martin Allen risk coming here? He has to know. Maybe that's exactly why he came. I reached for my wine glass like it was a shield, bringing it to my lips without tasting anything. My hands shook. 3 years of physical therapy had rebuilt my body, but apparently they hadn't covered what to do when the man who saved your life shows up at your father's gala and everyone thinks he's a monster. That wasn't in any recovery manual. Martin stood near the edge of the dance floor, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He wasn't watching the crowd. Wasn't scanning for threats or calculating exits like I'd imagine a mafia boss would. He was watching me. Only me. And something about that steady, unwavering attention made my chest feel too small for my heartbeat. Around him, the crowd gave him space, an invisible radius of fear and respect that no one dared cross. Even the waiters adjusted their paths to avoid him. But Martin didn't seem to notice or care. His focus hadn't wavered since he'd walked through those ballroom doors. I tried to look away. Tried to disappear into my corner table like I'd perfected over the past 3 years. But my eyes kept finding his, drawn like magnets, like gravity, like something inevitable I didn't have words for. Then he moved. Not quickly. Not aggressively. Just a steady, purposeful walk through the crowd that parted before him like the Red Sea. Each step brought him closer. Each step made my pulse hammer harder.
The air changed.
Grew heavier. Stiller. My father noticed. He was mid-conversation with Gerald Morrison and two Japanese investors, but his body went rigid. I watched him track Martin's path across the ballroom, watched his face cycle through shock, rage, and something that looked terrifyingly close to panic. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. Mabel. But Martin was already at my table. Up close, he was taller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just been lying in wreckage last time we'd been this near each other. His suit was impeccably tailored, black on black with a charcoal tie that probably cost more than my gown. The tattoos I remembered peeked out from his collar and cuffs, serpents and shadows that marked him as dangerous even when he stood perfectly still. But his eyes. God, his eyes were exactly as I remembered. Dark and deep and impossibly gentle for a man the world called a devil. He stopped directly in front of me, extended his hand, palm up, patient, offering rather than demanding. May I have this dance? His voice was low, meant only for me, but in the sudden silence of the ballroom it carried like thunder. The room erupted. Murmurs rippled outward in waves, shocked, scandalized, hungry for gossip. Camera phones appeared like fireflies, flashes bursting across the ballroom. At the head table, my father's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered across marble, the sound sharp and final. Mabel, no. My father's voice cracked across the distance. But I couldn't look at him. Couldn't look at anyone except Martin, whose hand remained steady and outstretched, waiting for an answer only I could give. I should have said no. Should have laughed it off or called security or done literally anything except consider dancing with the man my father had spent 3 years hunting. The man whose organization controlled half the city's underground. The man whose reputation was built on violence and fear and power that operated outside the law. But when I looked into his eyes, all I saw was the person who'd dragged me from fire when he could have walked away. Everyone's watching, I whispered. I know. His hand didn't waver. Do you trust me? I don't even know you. Yes, you do.
His voice softened.
You've known me since the worst night of your life. The question is whether you trust yourself enough to remember. The words hit like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. Because he was right. I did know him. Not his name or his reputation or the empire he'd built in shadows. But I knew his hands. His voice. The way he'd promised me I'd survive when survival seemed impossible. Behind him, the crowd pressed closer. Vultures circling, hungry for drama. My father started pushing through guests, Gerald trying and failing to hold him back. Security guards spoke urgently into earpieces, hands hovering near weapons. Martin's gaze never left mine. You survived fire, he murmured, and this time the words felt like a prayer. Don't hide from light. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked open. Like a door I'd kept sealed for 3 years finally giving way. I placed my trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around mine. Warm, steady, impossibly gentle. The same hands that had pulled me from wreckage. The same hands that, according to police reports, had killed without hesitation. The orchestra conductor fumbled his baton, then recovered and signaled frantically. The music began again, something slow and aching that made the air feel like honey.
Martin helped me stand.
My legs barely cooperated, but his hand on my back steadied me, grounded me. I've got you, he whispered, just like before. We walked toward the center of the dance floor. Every eye tracked our movement. Every whisper followed us, like smoke. But with each step, something strange happened. The noise faded. The crowd blurred. The judgment and the stares and the 3 years of hiding all fell away until there was only the music, his hand in mine, and the impossible truth that the man the world feared was the only person who'd ever made me feel brave. We began to dance, and at first it was a disaster. My feet didn't remember how to move. 3 years of avoiding social events meant 3 years of not dancing, and my body had forgotten the rhythm. I stumbled on the first step, nearly tripping over my own gown. Martin caught me effortlessly, his hand tightening on my back. I've got you, he murmured. There's no rush. We have all night. We definitely don't, I whispered back, acutely aware of 500 pairs of eyes locked on us. My father looks like he's about to commit murder. He's been planning that for 3 years. He can wait 5 more minutes. The absurdity of it, dancing with the man my father wanted dead while discussing said father's homicidal intentions, pulled a shocked laugh from my throat. Martin's lips quirked into something that might have been a smile if he let it fully form. There, he said softly. That's better. Now, just follow me. And somehow, impossibly, I did. The awkwardness melted. My feet found the rhythm. His hand on my back was warm and steady, guiding me without forcing, leading without controlling. My trembling hand in his began to settle, matching the calm certainty of his grip. We moved together like we'd done this before, like our bodies remembered something our minds hadn't caught up to yet. How are you so good at this? I asked, breathless. I'm not. His eyes stayed locked on my face, never wavering, never straying to the crowd or the cameras or my father's barely contained fury. I'm just paying attention to you. Heat crawled up my neck. No one had looked at me like that since before the fire. Not with pity or curiosity, or that awful combination of both. Martin looked at me like I was the only person in the room. Like the scar cutting down my face was just another detail, no more significant than the color of my dress or the way I wore my hair. He looked at me like I was whole. Around us, the ballroom had gone eerily quiet. The whispers had died. Even the clinking of champagne glasses had stopped. 500 of the world's most powerful people stood frozen, watching the scarred CEO's daughter dance with a devil in a suit. They're all staring. I breathed. Let them. His hand shifted slightly on my back, pulling me an inch closer. They've been staring at you all night anyway. At least now they're seeing you actually live instead of just survive. The words hit harder than they should have. Because he was right. I'd spent 3 years surviving, hiding in corners, avoiding mirrors, shrinking myself down to something manageable, something that wouldn't upset people or make them uncomfortable. But this? Dancing in the center of the ballroom with a man I barely knew but somehow trusted completely? This was living. Martin's thumb traced a gentle circle against my palm, grounding, comforting. The music swelled around us, romantic and aching and perfect. Then, halfway through, Martin leaned toward the pianist. The movement was subtle, but I felt his body shift, felt his attention briefly leave me. He murmured something too low for me to hear, and the pianist's eyes widened. He glanced at my father, then at Martin, then nodded quickly. The current song faded into silence. For 3 heartbeats, there was nothing. No music. No sound except my pulse hammering in my ears. Then the first notes of Fur Elise floated through the ballroom like ghosts. I froze mid-step. The world tilted. My vision blurred. Suddenly, I wasn't in a ballroom anymore. I was 7 years old, sitting on my mother's lap while she hummed this exact melody. I was 12, listening to her play it on our grand piano before school. I was 21, hearing it drift through smoke and flames while everything I knew burned down around me. No, I whispered. No, that's... My father gasped audibly from across the room. I turned my head just enough to see him sink into his chair, one hand covering his mouth. Tears spilled down his cheeks, the first time I'd seen him cry in public since my mother's funeral. The melody continued, each note a knife wrapped in silk. Beautiful and devastating and impossibly familiar. Why that song? My voice cracked. How did you? Martin's grip on my hand tightened. Not painfully, but anchoring, keeping me present when every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to escape the memories flooding back. Because, he said quietly, his voice rough with something that sounded like old pain, it's the only one that ever stopped you from shaking. The ballroom disappeared. The crowd, the cameras, the whispers, all of it faded into static. What? I breathed. That night. His eyes held mine, dark and haunted and unbearably honest. When I pulled you from the wreckage, you were shaking so hard I thought you'd break apart, going into shock. Hypothermia setting in despite the fire. The memories came faster now.
Smoke. Pain.
Cold that shouldn't have existed in an inferno. The paramedics were still 5 minutes out. Martin continued. You were fading. So I did the only thing I could think of. His jaw tightened. I hummed this song. Your mother had been playing it when the explosion hit. I'd heard it through the walls while I was setting the charges. Horror and understanding crashed through me simultaneously. You were there, I whispered. Before the fire. You were. I was there to destroy your father's company. To kill everyone inside if necessary. His voice was steady, but his eyes held 3 years of regret. But when the charges went off early, when I heard you screaming, when I saw you trapped, he paused. I heard this song in my head, your mother's song, and I couldn't do it. The piano continued playing, each note another revelation. You hummed for Elise while you saved me? You stopped shaking, he said simply. You looked at me, and you stopped shaking. So I kept humming until the ambulance arrived. Tears burned down my face, hot and fast and unstoppable. Around us, the ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the music felt distant, like it was playing in another world. My father was standing now, one hand pressed to his heart, tears streaming freely. He'd never told me that my mother had been playing piano when the explosion hit. Never told me what her last moments looked like. But Martin knew. Martin had been there. You were supposed to kill us, I whispered. I was. But you saved me instead. His hand trembled slightly against my back, the first crack in his composure. Some orders, he said quietly, aren't worth following. Some songs are worth remembering. And some people, his eyes held mine. Some people are worth saving, even if it costs you everything. The final notes of For Elise faded into silence. And standing in the center of the ballroom, held by the man who should have been my killer but became my savior, I finally understood. He was there. He'd always been there. And nothing would ever be the same again. The music stopped, but we kept swaying, like our bodies hadn't gotten the message yet, or maybe they just refused to let go. I need you to understand something, Martin said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Before your father gets here. Before this all falls apart. Understand what? His hand slid from my back, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was letting me go. Instead, he reached for the top button of his shirt. What are you? Just look. He undid the button, then another, pulling the fabric aside just enough to reveal his chest. There, carved into the skin above his heart, was a burn scar. Thick and angry and jagged, a mirror image of the one that ran down my shoulder. My breath caught. That's from the same fire. He let the fabric fall back into place, his fingers working the buttons closed with practiced efficiency. The beam that trapped you? When I lifted it, the metal was still burning. It took 30 seconds to get you free. Felt like 30 years. 3 years ago. Smoke thick enough to choke on. Flames crawling up walls like living things. I'd been in my father's office, retrieving documents he'd forgotten. The explosion threw me across the room, pinned me under steel that smelled like hell itself. Then hands. Tattooed hands gripping the beam. Don't look at it, a voice commanded. Look at me. Stay with me. He'd lifted the beam with a sound like agony, his or the metal's, I couldn't tell. Then he was pulling me up, half carrying me through smoke so thick I couldn't see my own hands. My mother, I'd screamed. She's still in there. His grip had tightened. I know.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. We'd made it to the stairwell when the second explosion hit. The world went white, then black, then red with pain. The memory shattered as Martin's voice pulled me back to the ballroom. I was hired by Viktor Kozlov, he said. Russian oligarch. Your father had testified against him in a corruption case 3 years prior. Kozlov wanted revenge, not just on your father, but on everything he'd built. Martin's jaw tightened. The contract was explicit. Burn Ace Corporation to the ground. Make sure no one walked out. Horror crawled up my spine. You were there to murder us. I was there to follow orders. His eyes held mine unflinching. I'd set the charges throughout the building. Timed them perfectly. I was supposed to be gone before they detonated. He paused. but they went off early. Some kind of electrical surge. I was still inside when the first explosion hit. Why? The word came out broken. Why were you still inside? Because I heard your mother playing piano. His voice went soft, almost reverent. For Elise. It came through the walls while I was setting the final charge in the executive suite. And I stood there listening, remembering. Remembering what? My sister used to play that song. Martin's composure cracked, just for a moment. She died when she was 16. Killed by men like me, following orders from men like Kozlov. He looked away, jaw working. Hearing that melody again, it made me hesitate. Just 30 seconds. But it was enough. The explosion. My mother's scream cutting off. The beam crushing down. Then him. Pulling me free. Humming for Elise through smoke and chaos because it was the only thing that kept me from shattering completely. You saved me, I whispered. You disobeyed your orders and saved me. I tried to save you both. Pain etched deep lines around his eyes. Your mother was already gone when I reached her. The first explosion, she didn't suffer. But you, his hand trembled slightly against mine. You were trapped and terrified, and you looked so much like my sister that I couldn't.
He stopped.
Steadied himself. I couldn't let you die for someone else's revenge. Emotions crashed through me like competing tides. Horror at what he'd been sent to do. Confusion at why he'd stopped. Gratitude, so overwhelming it felt like drowning. You nearly died saving me, I said. The second explosion caught us in the stairwell. Threw us both down a flight of stairs. He touched his chest, where the scar hid beneath his shirt. The beam burned me. The fall cracked 3 ribs and fractured my skull. I woke up 2 days later in a warehouse, not a hospital. Couldn't risk police questions. And my father spent 3 years hunting me. Martin's voice held no bitterness, only resignation. He knew someone had set the charges. The evidence was clear. When witnesses reported seeing a man with tattoos leaving the building, he assumed, correctly, that I was responsible. But he doesn't know you saved me. No. Martin's eyes found mine. How could he? I disappeared. The black serpents cover my tracks. And you were unconscious when I pulled you out. I don't even know if you remember my face from that night. I remember your hands. My voice shook. Your voice. The song. But not the man who was supposed to kill you. The truth settled between us like glass, beautiful and sharp and impossible to hold without bleeding. Why tell me now? I asked. Why come here, knowing my father wants you dead? Because you've been hiding for 3 years. His thumb traced over my knuckles. And I couldn't stand watching you disappear when I worked so hard to make sure you lived. Tears spilled faster now. You were supposed to kill us. I was. You disobeyed orders. Saved me instead. Nearly died. Yes. Why? The word came out desperate. Why would you do that? Martin's composure finally crumbled. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something raw. Because you reminded me of someone I lost. Because that song made me remember who I used to be before I became this. He gestured vaguely at himself. Because some people are worth saving, even when the whole world says they're not. Your sister would have been your age. He smiled, sad and small. She used to say that music could save people. That beauty mattered, even in darkness. His grip tightened on my hand. I didn't believe her until I heard you crying under that beam. The ballroom felt impossibly far away. Like we were dancing in our own universe, held together by truth and trauma and 3 years of misunderstood history. Then my father's voice shattered everything. Mabel. It echoed across the silent ballroom, command and plea and heartbreak all at once. Step away from him.
Now.
The crowd parted. My father stood 20 feet away, flanked by security guards with hands on weapons. His face was pale, tear-streaked, twisted with fury and anguish. That man, he said, voice shaking, set the fire that killed your mother. I know, I whispered. Then step away. He also saved my life. My father froze. The ballroom held its breath. And the truth, finally spoken aloud, hung between us like smoke. My father stormed across the ballroom like a man possessed. Security guards flanked him, hands hovering near concealed weapons. Gerald Morrison trailed behind, frantically whispering something my father completely ignored. The crowd scattered before him. 500 powerful people suddenly reduced to spectators at a collision they couldn't stop.
Step away
From
my
daughter. Each word came out jagged, barely controlled. Martin didn't move, didn't release my hand, didn't even tense. He just stood there, calm and steady, like he'd been expecting this moment for 3 years and was finally, almost gratefully, letting it arrive. "Mr. Ace," he said quietly, "I understand. You understand nothing." My father's voice cracked across the ballroom. His face had gone from pale to flushed, a vein pulsing at his temple. "You murdered my wife. You destroyed my company. You took everything from me. I saved your daughter." The words landed like a slap. My father stumbled, actually stumbled, like the ground had shifted beneath him. "You expect me to believe that?" Spittle flew from his lips. "You expect me to believe that the man I've spent 3 years hunting, the criminal who set those charges, who planned that attack, you expect me to believe you suddenly grew a conscience?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," Martin said, his voice maddeningly calm. "I'm just telling you what happened. You're a liar. A murderer. I am a murderer." Martin didn't flinch from the accusation. "I've killed 17 men in my life. Most of them deserved it. Some didn't. I'm not here to defend who I am, Mr. Ace. I'm here to tell you the truth about that night." The ballroom had gone so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Cameras captured everything: my father's rage, Martin's composure, my hand still clasped in his. "The truth?" My father laughed, a terrible, broken sound. "The truth is that you're a monster who should have died in that fire instead of," his voice caught. "Instead of her. Instead of my mother." The words he couldn't say hung in the air like smoke. Martin's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I was hired by Viktor Kozlov to destroy Ace Corporation. The contract was specific: burn the building, eliminate any witnesses. I set the charges. I planned the attack." He paused, letting the confession settle. "But when those charges detonated early, when I heard your wife playing piano, when I found your daughter trapped, I made a choice. To save yourself. To save her." Martin's composure finally cracked, just slightly. "I destroyed the men who planned the attack. Kozlov's entire organization. I dismantled it piece by piece over the following year. Every person who signed off on that contract, who funded it, who celebrated your wife's death, I made sure they paid." His eyes held my father's. "I only saved what was innocent." The words hit like bullets. My father's face cycled through expressions too fast to name: rage, disbelief, confusion, and underneath it all, something that looked like hope fighting desperately not to surface. "You're telling me," his voice shook, "you're telling me you went after Kozlov? I'm telling you there's a reason he disappeared 18 months ago." Martin's voice was cold now, distant. "I'm telling you there's a reason his entire network collapsed. I'm telling you that the man who ordered your wife's death died slowly, painfully, and knowing exactly why." My father swayed. Gerald caught his elbow, but he shook him off. "That doesn't change what you are," my father said, but the fury had drained from his voice, leaving only exhaustion. "That doesn't change what you did." "No," Martin agreed. "It doesn't. You set those charges. You planned to kill us all." "I did. My wife is dead because of you. Your wife is dead because I hesitated." Martin's voice finally broke. "If I'd refused the contract outright, if I'd warned you, if I'd done anything except set those charges and hope for the best, she might still be alive. So yes, Mr. Ace. Your wife's death is on my hands. I've lived with that for 3 years." He paused. "But your daughter's life is on my hands too. And I won't apologize for that." The tension peaked. The entire ballroom held its breath, hundreds of people frozen, watching a father and a killer face each other across 3 years of grief and rage and misunderstood truth. The orchestra had stopped completely. Even the waiters had gone still. My father opened his mouth, to yell, to threaten, to order Martin's arrest. And that's when something inside me snapped. I stepped between them. Not dramatically. Not with any plan or speech prepared. I just moved, placing myself in the space where their fury met, and faced my father for the first time in 3 years with something other than guilt and shame. "Dad," I said quietly. "Stop." He blinked at me like I'd materialized from thin air. "Mabel, get out of the way."
No.
The word felt foreign. Powerful.
Mine.
My father's eyes widened. In 24 years, I'd never told him no. Never challenged him. Never stood between him and anything he wanted. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. I understand that you've spent 3 years hunting the wrong man." My voice shook but held. "I understand that you've been drowning in guilt over Mom's death, over my scars, over everything you think you should have prevented."
Tears burned down my cheeks.
"I understand that you can't look at me without seeing your failure. But Dad," I reached back, found Martin's hand, held it. "He didn't just save my life. He gave me back my courage. Mabel, you want to know why I've been hiding for 3 years?" The words tumbled out, raw and honest. "Because every time you looked at me, I saw disappointment. I saw guilt. I saw a father who couldn't bear the sight of what I'd become." My voice cracked. "But I squeezed Martin's hand. "He looks at me and sees someone worth saving. Someone worth risking everything for." My father's face crumbled. The rage bled away, leaving only naked pain. He stopped. Started again. "I never meant to make you feel. I know. And I did. But that doesn't change what happened." The ballroom watched in absolute silence. 500 people witnessing a father finally seeing his daughter. Really seeing her. My father's eyes glistened. He looked at me, then at Martin, then back at me. His jaw worked. His hands trembled. Then, finally, a single tear spilled down his cheek. Richard Ace, the man who'd built an empire through sheer will and ruthless determination, the CEO who never showed weakness, the father who'd spent 3 years locked in armor forged from grief and rage, broke. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Mabel, I'm so sorry." And the armor of pride, finally, mercifully, cracked. My father's legs gave out. I caught him, or tried to. Gerald appeared at his other side, and together we guided him to the nearest chair. He collapsed into it like a puppet with cut strings, face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking with 3 years of suppressed grief finally breaking free. "I'm sorry," he kept whispering. "I'm so sorry." I knelt beside him, one hand on his knee. "I know, Dad. I know." Behind me, Martin stood perfectly still. Not retreating, not advancing, just waiting. Giving us space while remaining close enough that I could feel his presence like gravity. The pianist, bless him, had started playing again. Softly this time, almost tentatively. Fur Elise drifted through the ballroom like a ghost we'd finally learned to welcome instead of fear. My father looked up, eyes red and swollen. "I spent 3 years hunting him," he said hoarsely. 3 years believing he destroyed our family. "He saved what was left of it," I replied gently. "I know that now." He glanced past me at Martin, then back at me. "But Mabel, he's still dangerous? A criminal? A killer?" I smiled sadly.
Yes. He's all of those things.
"But he's also the reason I'm alive. The reason I'm here, talking to you, instead of buried beside Mom." My father flinched at the truth of it. "I don't expect you to forgive him," I continued. "I don't even expect you to trust him. But I need you to see what he did for me. Not just that night, but tonight." I gestured around the ballroom. "I've been hiding for 3 years, Dad. Sitting in corners, avoiding mirrors, shrinking myself down until I barely existed. And you," my voice caught. "You let me, because it was easier than facing what we'd both lost." "I didn't know how to help you," he whispered. "Neither did I." I stood, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. But he did. I turned to face Martin. He hadn't moved, still standing in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by stunned guests and judgmental stares and 3 years of reputation he couldn't escape even if he wanted to. But when he looked at me, none of that mattered. For 3 years, I'd endured a specific kind of gaze. Pity mixed with discomfort. Curiosity wrapped in politeness. The awful combination of people wanting to look at my scar while pretending they weren't looking at all.
Martin never looked at me that way.
He'd looked at me like I was a person worth saving. Like my scars were evidence of strength, not weakness. Like the fire that had tried to destroy me had only revealed how unbreakable I actually was. He'd looked at me like I was whole. And standing there, watching my father cry and the crowd whisper and the world judge us both, I realized something that felt like revelation. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. Freedom from the weight of hatred. Freedom from the prison of grief. Freedom from defining yourself by what was done to you instead of what you chose to become. I'd spent 3 years carrying rage I didn't know how to name, at the people who'd planted the bomb, at fate for taking my mother, at God for leaving me scarred, at myself for surviving when she didn't. But standing here now, I realized I'd been carrying the wrong weight all along. The real weight wasn't the scars. It was the hiding. I extended my hand to Martin. "Dance with me," I whispered. His eyes widened slightly, surprise cracking through his careful composure. "Your father is watching his daughter choose to live." I stepped closer. "Dance with me. Please." Martin's hand found mine, and the world shifted. The ballroom lights dimmed as if on cue, or maybe the lighting technician understood the moment better than we did. Shadows softened everything except the two of us, standing in a pool of golden light that felt almost sacred. We began to move. This time, there was no awkwardness. No stumbling. My body remembered his rhythm, followed his lead like we'd been dancing together for years instead of minutes. The pianist played on, for Elise flowing into something softer, something hopeful. Around us, the crowd remained frozen, but something in the air had changed. The judgment had softened. I caught glimpses of faces as we turned, women with tears streaming down their cheeks, men clearing their throats, hands finding hands across tables. The same people who'd whispered about my scars were now watching me dance, and for the first time, they weren't seeing tragedy. They were seeing courage. "You're smiling," Martin murmured. I was. I could feel it, a real smile, not the practiced one I'd perfected for public appearances. I forgot what this felt like. What? Being alive. I looked up at him. Not just surviving. Actually living. His grip tightened slightly. "You deserve to feel this way every day."
"So do you."
Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Like no one had ever suggested that a killer might deserve peace. We spun slowly, and the ballroom spun with us. Music wrapped around us like silk. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't a scarred daughter, hiding in the corner. I wasn't the tragic reminder of Richard Ace's greatest loss. I was just Mabel. Dancing. Living. Whole. A sound cut through the music, soft at first, then building. Applause. One person started it. Then another. Then more, until the entire ballroom was clapping. Not mockingly, not scandalously, but genuinely. Celebrating not the spectacle of a mafia boss dancing with a CEO's daughter, but the simple truth of two people finding grace in chaos. I glanced toward my father. He stood now, Gerald supporting his elbow. Tears streamed freely down his face, but he was smiling. Actually smiling, the first genuine expression of joy I'd seen from him since my mother died. "She's smiling again," he whispered to Gerald, voice breaking. "My baby girl is smiling again." Gerald nodded, wiping his own eyes. "She is, Richard. She really is." Martin pulled me closer as the music swelled toward its conclusion. "How do you feel?" he asked.
I thought about that.
About 3 years of hiding. About scars that had defined me. About a father who couldn't look at me without seeing his failures. About a mafia boss who disobeyed orders because a song reminded him of his sister. About this moment, dancing in front of 500 people who judged me, with a man the world feared, while my father finally saw me again. "I feel free," I whispered. And for the first time since fire carved its mark into my skin, I meant it. The music ended. Martin and I stood in the center of the ballroom, still holding each other, while applause thundered around us. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt alive. The applause faded, but the cameras never stopped. I could see them around the perimeter of the ballroom. Phone cameras held high, professional photographers crouching for better angles, journalists frantically typing notes into their devices. Tomorrow's headlines were being written in real time, and for once, I didn't care what they'd say. Let them write their stories. Tonight, I was living mine. The dance that silenced the elite. I heard someone whisper near the bar. A journalist, probably, already crafting her opening line. She wasn't wrong. The elite had been silenced. 500 of the world's most powerful people reduced to witnesses of something they didn't quite understand but couldn't look away from. Redemption, maybe. Or grace. Or just the messy, complicated truth that people aren't always what they seem. Martin's hand remained on my back even though the music had stopped. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "Ask me tomorrow." His lips quirked into something almost like a smile. "Tomorrow you'll probably regret all of this." "Probably." I looked up at him. "But tonight, I don't regret anything." Movement caught my eye. My father had stood from his chair, Gerald's steadying hand falling away as he found his balance. His face was still tear-streaked, his tuxedo rumpled from collapsing into the seat, but something in his posture had changed. The weight he'd been carrying, 3 years of rage and grief and guilt, seemed lighter somehow. Not gone, but no longer crushing him. He took a step toward us. Then another. The ballroom held its breath. Security guards tensed, hands hovering near weapons. Gerald looked ready to intervene. Even the journalists stopped typing, sensing that whatever happened next would define the entire night. My father stopped 3 feet away from Martin. This close, I could see how much he'd aged in 3 years. The gray threading through his temples, the lines carved deep around his eyes, the exhaustion etched into every feature. Martin released me and stepped forward, placing himself between my father and me. Protective without being aggressive. Ready for whatever came next. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The CEO and the criminal. The father and the man who'd saved his daughter. 3 years of hatred and misunderstanding compressed into a single moment of impossible truth. Then my father extended his hand. It trembled. His fingers shook like he was reaching across an impossible distance instead of 3 feet of marble floor. But the gesture was unmistakable. Sincere. "You gave me back my daughter," he said, voice raw and broken and honest. "I don't understand how or why, and I probably never will. But you," he stopped, swallowed hard. "You gave me back my daughter when I'd already lost her. Not to the fire, but to my own grief." Martin stared at the offered hand like it was a trap, like accepting it would cost him something he wasn't sure he could afford to give. "Mr. Ace," he started carefully, "I'm still the man who set those charges. I'm still responsible for. I know who you are." My father's hand didn't waver. "I've spent 3 years learning everything about you. Your organization. Your crimes. The people you've killed." He paused. "But I've also spent the last 10 minutes learning something I didn't know. You're the reason my daughter is still breathing." Silence stretched between them, fragile, uncertain, heavy with 3 years of grief that might finally be ready to transform into something else. Martin took my father's hand. The handshake was brief, firm, weighted with meaning no words could capture. 2 men who should have been enemies, connected by a scarred woman who'd learned to stop hiding. The ballroom erupted. Not in whispers or judgment this time, in applause. Genuine, thunderous, the kind that shakes chandeliers and rattles champagne glasses. People stood, some wiping tears, others simply staring in stunned disbelief. The dance that silenced the elite would become the handshake that changed everything by morning. I could already hear the journalists revising their angles. My father released Martin's hand and turned to me. Mabel. I didn't let him finish. I crossed the distance between us and threw my arms around him, holding tight enough that maybe, finally, he'd understand I forgave him. For the distance. For the guilt. For every moment he'd looked at me and seen his failure instead of his daughter. He hugged me back, his whole body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for 3 years. I'm sorry, he whispered into my hair. For everything. For making you feel like you had to hide. For not seeing you. I know, Dad. Tears soaked into his shoulder. I forgive you. I forgive you. We stood there in the center of the ballroom, father and daughter, finally finding each other again through the smoke and grief and scars that had kept us apart. Around us, the applause continued, but it felt distant, like background music to our private moment of healing. When we finally pulled apart, my father kept one hand on my shoulder. He looked at Martin, then back at me. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. I don't know how to reconcile what he is with what he did for you. You don't have to reconcile it tonight, I said gently. Tonight, you just have to accept it. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Okay. Gerald appeared with fresh drinks and a quiet word in my father's ear. The crowd began to disperse, some heading to the bar for celebratory drinks, others clustering in groups to dissect what they'd just witnessed. The gala resumed its rhythm, but everything had changed. Martin caught my eye across the space my father had created between us. He looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or disappear now that the moment had passed. I smiled at him, a real smile, one that said, "Don't leave yet." He understood. He always seemed to understand. The journalists would write their stories. The gossip blogs would explode. By morning, video clips of the dance, the confrontation, the handshake would be everywhere. Mafia boss and CEO's daughter. The man who saved her from fire returns. Forgiveness under crystal chandeliers. They'd get some of it right, most of it wrong. But standing there, watching my father accept a glass of whiskey from Gerald while Martin lingered near the edge of the dance floor, I realized something profound. The night could have ended in scandal, in violence, in my father calling for Martin's arrest and Martin disappearing into shadows he'd never fully escape. Instead, it ended in grace. Messy, complicated, imperfect grace. The kind that doesn't erase the past but makes space for a different future. Sometimes, I whisper to no one in particular, the people we fear most carry the light we need. A journalist nearby heard me. She smiled and typed the quote into her phone. Tomorrow, that line would be everywhere. But tonight it was just the truth. 3 weeks later, I stood on a rooftop cafe overlooking the city, watching the sunset paint the skyline in shades of amber and rose. The cafe was tucked away on the 42nd floor of a building most people didn't know existed, the kind of place where privacy cost as much as the coffee, and the staff knew better than to ask questions. Martin had chosen it carefully. Neutral territory. Quiet. Safe. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, steady, unhurried, familiar now in a way they hadn't been the night of the gala. You're early, he said, joining me at the railing. I'm always early. I smiled without looking at him. You're exactly on time. Old habits. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe below us. 3 weeks had passed since the gala, and the world had changed in ways both profound and subtle. The media had exploded, exactly as predicted. The dance that silenced the elite had dominated headlines for a week straight. Think pieces about forgiveness, redemption, and the complexity of morality flooded every platform. My father's company stock had actually risen. Apparently, investors found the story inspiring rather than scandalous. But the real changes were quieter. How's the transition? I asked. Martin's jaw tightened slightly. Harder than I expected. Easier than I deserved. He'd left the Black Serpents, or as much as anyone truly left that world. He'd transferred leadership, liquidated assets, severed ties with operations that couldn't be legitimized. It wasn't a clean break. It never could be, but it was a break nonetheless. Any regrets? I asked. Every day.
He turned to face me.
But not about leaving. About not leaving sooner. I understood that. I'd spent 3 weeks working with the Phoenix Foundation, a charity supporting burn survivors, and every day I met someone who reminded me of who I used to be.
Hiding.
Ashamed. Convinced their scars made them unworthy of being seen. I told them what Martin had told me. You survived fire. Don't hide from light. Some listened. Some weren't ready. I understood that too. My father called this morning, I said. Martin's posture shifted subtly. Not quite tensing, but preparing. And he wants to have dinner. All 3 of us. That's, Martin paused, searching for the right word. Unexpected. He's trying. I finally looked at him. It's awkward and uncomfortable and probably too soon, but he's trying. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. I smiled. But it's what you're getting anyway. The cafe door opened behind us. I turned, expecting a waiter, and found my father instead. He looked different. Lighter somehow, despite the gray at his temples and the exhaustion that still shadowed his eyes. He wore a casual suit instead of his usual armor of corporate perfection, and he was carrying something small wrapped in velvet. Dad. I moved toward him. I thought we were meeting at 7. I wanted to catch you both. He glanced at Martin, nodded awkwardly. Martin. Mr. Ace. The formality sat strangely between them. 2 men who'd shared tears and trauma, but didn't quite know how to be human with each other yet. My father cleared his throat. I won't stay long. He held out the velvet package. This is for you, Mabel. I took it carefully, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a gold locket. Delicate, intricate, unmistakably my mother's. She wore it every day, my father said quietly. Even that last day. It survived the fire somehow. His voice caught. I've been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I think, he looked at Martin then back at me. I think now is that moment. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the locket. Inside were 2 photos, one of my mother, young and radiant, and one of me as a child, laughing at something just out of frame. She'd want you to have it, my father continued. She'd want you to remember that love survives everything, even fire. I couldn't speak, could only hold the locket and cry while my father pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. When we separated, he turned to Martin. The 2 men stared at each other, CEO and former crime lord, father and the man who'd saved his daughter. Take care of her, my father said finally. She's all I have left. The words were simple. The weight behind them was not. Martin met his eyes steadily. I will. You have my word. Your word. My father almost smiled. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't have believed that meant anything. Now, he paused. Now I think it might be worth more than most. He left after that, with another awkward nod and a promise to see us at dinner next week. When the rooftop was quiet again, Martin moved closer. He gave you his blessing, he said. He gave me my mother's locket. I fastened it around my neck. The blessing was implied. Still. Martin's hand found mine. That's significant. It is. We stayed on that rooftop until the sun disappeared and the city lights blazed like fallen stars. We talked about forgiveness and loss and second chances. About how healing isn't linear and grace isn't easy and love doesn't erase trauma. It just makes it bearable. 2 months later, I found myself in another ballroom. Not the grand, intimidating space of Ace Corporation's gala. This one was smaller, intimate, a restored historic building with exposed brick and string lights that turned everything soft and golden. It was a fundraiser for the Phoenix Foundation. 50 people instead of 500. Survivors and supporters instead of elite judges. Martin had insisted on sponsoring the entire event, anonymously of course, but I knew. The evening was winding down when the pianist began playing something familiar. Fur Elise. I turned to find Martin standing behind me, hand extended, that almost smile playing at his lips. May I have this dance? The question felt like coming full circle. Like everything that had happened, the fire, the scars, the gala, the confrontation, the healing, had led to this moment. I took his hand. Always. We moved to the center of the small dance floor. A few people watched, but not with judgment, with warmth, with understanding, with the kind of support that comes from people who know what survival costs. Martin pulled me close. Closer than he had that first night, when propriety and caution had kept distance between us. Now, there was no distance. Just his hand on my back, my head against his chest, and music that had once marked my worst night transforming into something beautiful. "This song," I whispered. "It used to haunt me. And now—" I looked up at him. "Now it's ours." His eyes held mine, dark and warm and full of something that looked like forever. "Our song," he repeated softly. "Our song," I confirmed. We danced as the music swelled and softened around us. I thought about everything that had brought us here. The fire that had scarred us both. The night he'd chosen mercy over orders. The gala where he'd asked me to dance. My father's tears and forgiveness. The slow, difficult work of healing. Some scars never fade. The one on my face would always be visible. The one on Martin's chest would always remind him of the night he'd disobeyed everything he'd been taught. But dancing there, held by a man who'd saved me in every way a person can be saved, I realized something profound. Scars don't have to hurt forever. With love, messy, complicated, hard-won love, they become something else. Not erased, but transformed. Evidence of survival. Proof of strength. Maps of how far we've traveled from where we began. The music faded. Martin's arms tightened around me. "I love you," he whispered into my hair. 3 words. Simple. Revolutionary. "I know," I whispered back. "I love you too." And there, in a small ballroom filled with survivors and second chances, with my mother's locket warm against my chest and my father's blessing in my pocket, I finally understood the truth. Some scars never fade, but with love, they stop hurting.